All right, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Happy Thursday here. I know you have a mass assembly scheduled today, so I'd like to keep today's lesson short and to the point, so that way you guys can have some time to work on your homework that has been posted in eBackpack at this time. Um, Yesterday we had left off talking about the era of good feelings and certainly our position in regards to our relationship with Spain takes a turn in the I should say in the early 1800s in regards to Spain's lack of interest and control of Florida. Okay, we talked about General Jackson's role in helping to head into Florida, dealing with the Seminole Nation and also dealing with runaway slaves, but it proved to Spain that they really can't control a colony that really hadn't been making the money for years. So, due to the fact that our Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, the son of President John Adams, is going to wind up negotiating what becomes known as the Adams-Onis Treaty, as we started to speak about yesterday. This particular treaty is a treaty in which Spain is going to cede or give up Florida to the United States. So when you think about it, this was really the missing piece since the Louisiana Purchase. We controlled all of that territory in what is today the continental part of the United States, except for Florida. So now we control the entire eastern seaboard, we control the Mississippi River, and that idea of manifest destiny is certainly becoming more and more of a reality. On the flip side of things, we also have, at the same time, the reason why there weren't as many Spanish soldiers to protect Florida. The reason was because there were other more serious conflicts going on in other parts of Central and South America. And it was during this time that many of these Spanish colonies, inspired by the American Revolution, were leading uprisings to declare their independence. And Spain, recognizing that these colonies made them a lot more money, had spent a tremendous amount of money trying to put down these revolutions, but also making sure that these colonies did not gain their independence. And after years of fighting in all these different countries, one of the most notable ones is Mexico, our neighbor to the south. In 1821, their independence is officially recognized. And it seems as though that overnight, during the era of good feelings, again, this sense of pride in our country, that we all of a sudden become the older sibling on the block, so to speak, of the Western Hemisphere. We become really the oldest country on this side of the world when you think about it. And all of these other Spanish colonies turned countries are going to look to the United States for guidance and leadership. Mexico, for example, makes a constitution, okay, similar to our constitution. Their revolution was inspired by ours. But the one thing that we know when we talked about the United States gaining their independence was that in 1783, after the war, they were very vulnerable. Okay, wars cost money. Those countries are in debt, and these Spanish colonies turned countries now are actually going to be extremely vulnerable, which leads to one of really the most notable thing to be done during President Monroe's presidency. So with these new countries, or rather these colonies now countries gaining their independence, a light bulb goes off back in Europe, particularly from Great Britain, that recognizes a unique opportunity. For years, Spain, Great Britain, and France were at odds with each other. Financially, obviously, for reasons that we've spoken about. And now, with these colonies now countries, Britain wants to be able to trade with that region of the world for the first time ever. A lot of times, Spain and Britain at war, they never really had a strong foothold in Central and South America. So in order to do that, what Great Britain proposes to the United States is they are going to reach out to us in 1823 and ask the United States if we could serve as a country together to make a joint statement to the rest of the world that Great Britain and the United States are now going to be a tandem moving forward to protect the interest of those colonies that have gained their independence, to ensure that they remain independent, but also that both countries would help to protect colonies that want independence. And this is an interesting proposal for us. Great Britain could have came out and said it that they wanted to do this themselves, but they reach out to the United States, which was rather interesting. And for the United States, during this era of good feeling, on one side, you could make the argument that this is great. Britain is recognizing us as an equal. They want to make a joint statement with us. That is great. But John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State at the time, says, I don't necessarily like that idea. Because from Adams's perspective, if we were to make a joint statement with Great Britain to the rest of the world to say, hey, stay out of Central and South America or else, it's going to make us look like the inferior country. Okay, we're going to look like the youngest sibling that is sometimes always forgotten. So when you take that into consideration, John Quincy Adams advises President Monroe that this is a terrible idea. And what John Quincy Adams is going to wind up doing is he's going to draft up a speech that James Monroe is going to read to Congress in December of 1823. That is going to become basically our international policy. And what the Monroe Doctrine is it is an actual speech, but ultimately it is the United States' international policy that says that the United States is not going to allow any European nation, including Great Britain, to intervene in affairs here in the Western Hemisphere. Furthermore, what John Quincy Adams writes for Monroe to read is that the United States is going to look at any action if this statement is ignored by the rest of the world as an act of aggression. So basically, the United States is threatening that they would be willing to go to war in order to ensure that the protection of these Central and South American colonies and countries now. Furthermore, what the Monroe Doctrine ultimately said is that the United States would not look to interfere in European colonies or in European affairs. So basically what John Quincy Adams wants the United States to do through this speech delivered by Monroe is to say, hey, American affairs are American affairs. Let those countries or colonies in the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, deal with it, while European affairs should remain European affairs. And I think this ultimately is something that the United States was determined at a time that feelings are great to put our foot down and stand for something. Had this been a topic of conversation outside of the era of good feelings, I don't know if this wouldn't have or would have been so demonstrative in as far as how the United States was looking to make a statement like so. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this was a speech written by John Quincy Adams, delivered by James Monroe as part of his State of the Union address. It wasn't until 1850, way after James Monroe's presidency, that historians started to refer to this speech as the Monroe Doctrine. So many future presidents will make reference to the declarations made by the United States, and it was a big gamble when you think about it for Monroe. The fact that at this time in 1823 the United States was threatening to go to war with any European country that involved itself in in the American affairs was a huge risk and definitely a bluff. Many historians would make the argument we were not prepared to go to war had Spain or France or Great Britain really looked to assert themselves here in Central or South America. But as it plays out, no country was willing to test the United States to see if this was going to be the case. At the end of the day, wars cost money. So this in many ways becomes America's long-standing foreign affairs policy throughout the 19th century. What we will wind up seeing furthermore moving into the 20th century is President Roosevelt, or I should say Teddy Roosevelt, adding to this, and that's something that you'll get into next year. So certainly a vote of confidence for the United States as far as our international affairs go. All right, so at this point in time, I want to stop here, so that way tomorrow you can come in for a fresh lesson with Section 3. As seen on eBackpack, as of right now, assignment 10.2b has been posted, so what I want you to do for the remaining part of the period is to do a little bit of classwork and finish up with your Section 2 questions. I am going to ask that you submit those via eBackpack by tomorrow. Okay, so if you don't finish it here in class, please make sure that you submit it tomorrow morning. That being Friday morning, I will make a reminder with tomorrow's lesson that you should be submitting something via eBackpack. So work on those Section 2 questions, and then tomorrow and over the weekend, you'll have a chance to work on some Section 3 questions. Later today, if not by now, your Section 3 key term should be popping up. So for homework tonight, after you finish the questions, I would ask that you read Section 3, so that way tomorrow's lesson would make a little bit more sense, especially with the election of 1824, and that way you can get into, like I said, your key terms and questions over the weekend. So if you have any questions about the Monroe Doctrine, obviously make note of it, all right? This goes along specifically with what we had worked on yesterday in class for your classwork, so I would go back to reference parts of that speech that you answered questions on yesterday, and all of the stuff that we will go over when I return on Monday, okay? So hopefully you guys have behaved. Make sure you say thank you to the sub as you leave, and have an excellent rest of your Thursday, May 2nd, I believe. All right, May 2nd. All right, take care.